And it's essential to know the differences between the three different types of chiropractic care and the three different types of chiropractors out there, not because one is better than the other, but for your child, one might be the only one that is really dialed in to the right way to get the most effective, optimal, incredible results for your kiddo. Welcome to the Experience Miracles podcast, where we help parents find hope, answers, and drug-free help to overcome your child's chronic health challenges. I'm your host, Dr. Tony Ebel, and I'll be sharing my experiences as both a dad and a doctor on every episode. I can take the latest science and neurology of healing and break it down in the most simple and relatable way possible. We'll take on the toughest topics and answer your biggest questions through interviews with other amazing parents and leading experts, leaving you with practical action steps that you can take to help your child heal and thrive. It's time to expect and experience miracles. Let's get started. All right, all you rock star moms and dads and other providers out there listening to the Experience Miracles podcast, thank you for tuning in. I'm more excited for this episode than I think any one we've done yet, because it's the innards, it's the details of the work that we get to do. And it's actually going to really detail out my journey as a pediatric chiropractor, my journey from a standard chiropractor who is going to work on the spine and soft tissues and sports injuries that most people think of. That was my V1, as I'll go through. And then the second one was, all of a sudden I was everything to everyone. I was a functional neurologist and a biomedical interventionist before anybody even knew that was cool. And it was overwhelming to me, and it was overwhelming to parents, and it was overwhelming, most importantly, to the nervous systems and the physiology of the kiddos who are struggling or were struggling, and we were trying to help. And now we're here as neurologically focused pediatric chiropractors. And so as we've been just cranking this content here on the podcast, on Instagram, on Facebook, on YouTube, and anywhere on our website, the number one question, and it's not even close, it's kind of a bank of questions that are all the same question, is this: how do I know if the chiro we're already seeing is neurologically focused? How do I know if the chiro in my town or my community, the one that looks like they see kids and have a little bit of a family vibe to them, how do I know that they do this work that you're talking about and teaching on here? How do I find one? And how do I know the differences? And then this big one too, we'll cover on this episode. What if we've already tried chiropractic and gone through care and not seen results? And then another question that fits right in this same frame. And once you see this whole episode, you'll see it's actually the same question. Hey, do I need to worry about retained primitive reflexes, restricted airways, tongue and oral ties, and all these vestibular different proprioceptive functions that maybe you found some awesome functional neurologists online, on Instagram, in your community, and all of a sudden it's like this great scroll that I go to their websites, and it's like you just got to keep scrolling to hear about all the different therapies and services and treatments and interventions that they offer. And I understand every single one of those bullet points on their websites because I'm trained in every one of them. And as you're about to see, I applied and put in and installed, much to the, like frustration and looking over from the side and watching me and my wife who runs the clinic with me from the beginning, and being like, what are you doing, dude? Why are we all of a sudden going from doing one thing that was getting phenomenal results for patients? Now we do 70 things, and we're overwhelmed and we're frustrated, and it's exhausting and it's expensive. So some of you right now are really peaking up, right? You're really leaning in because you're thinking, man, his journey as a chiropractor actually sounds like my journey as a parent trying to help my child heal from these chronic illnesses. And as you're going to see from the beginning of this episode to the middle, or what I like to call the meat of this episode, remember, I'm a farm kid, so we use a lot of, different analogies like that throughout this podcast to the end of this episode, you're going to see absolutely this has been God's journey for me. I understand the differences between the three main types of chiropractic care better than I think anyone else on earth, because God made me a raging bull, hard charger. I love to learn. I can't shut it off. I literally was reading neurological research this morning, and I'll read it again tomorrow morning, and I'll read it again this weekend. So I can't turn off learning, and I definitely can't turn off doing, because the learning and the doing that I do is in service of others, particularly, very specifically, chronically sick and stressed kids. And I feel their struggles, and I know your struggles because I was in that hospital and that NICU for 6 weeks with my son, and I saw his MRIs and his EEGs, and I saw his struggle on his little body, and I felt every bit of there's no word for it, the stress, the fear, the anxiety of, will he deal with these seizures for his whole life? Will he have all of these neurological brain-based damages his whole life? Will we get him better or not? So I've gone through it all as a practitioner. I've studied it. And most importantly, I haven't just read textbooks and taken classes and seminars and certifications. I applied all 3 different types of chiropractic in my practice myself as a practitioner. So when I say I know the differences, when I say I know the results, I'm telling you, I know these lines of demarcation with absolute vivid clarity, and I'm going to go fast to respect your time, but I'm also going to go slow through the details because this is your baby. This is your kiddo. This is your family. And so the details really matter here. And it's actually even something that a lot of chiropractors, I don't think we're quite aware of, how much importance these differences really make when it comes to getting real, actual, optimal clinical results for our patients. And so this is going to be a life-transforming episode for a lot of parents. And who knows, maybe we'll reach hundreds or thousands of chiropractors too, and they'll get to realize there's a difference, and they get to say, that's the type I want to be and serve my community with. And the reason I wanted to just real quickly intertwine Oliver's story and my parents' story into this, guys, moms, dads listening out there, that is actually how I found my clarity. Right in the midst of Oliver's storm, I was right. That was right in the same season where I was a full functional neurology biomedical clinic. We did stool samples, we did labs, we did hair analysis, we did neurointegrative, we checked for primitive reflexes. I mean, I don't have time on this episode to tell you all the things we did under one roof because it was sold to me in those clinical trainings that, 1, this is what you need to do. And 2, wouldn't that be the best thing for them if they could get everything under one roof? What it turned out to be was I became a jack of all trades instead of a master of one. And when Oliver needed my help most, he needed neurologically focused chiropractic, the 3rd type of care that we're going to break down in detail with this episode, did wellness and living healthy and eating clean and the things that our family does all the time and your family does all the time. Did those matter? You're darn straight. That helped ensure that Oliver was more able to heal in a quicker, faster, I almost kind of call it cleaner way. But the second thing, all this functional neurology, primitive reflexes, kind of bells and whistles, I didn't, because I couldn't apply any of those to get Oliver better, and I didn't need to. So his experience, remember, this is the Experience Miracles podcast, and what makes this completely different, if you're just tuning in for the first time, you can scroll. When you're done with this one, you go all the way to the beginning, you can hear Oliver's story and the Perfect Storm story. What makes this difference is I teach, don't get worried about me right here, okay? I don't technically have 2 distinct personalities, but I have 2 distinct experiences that happen to run as God would have it, thankfully, awesomely, because I know that this is my calling to this world. I ran on one set of tracks, 2 trains at the same time. My parent experience and my clinician or provider experience really collided at the same time to give me the clarity and the absolute differences, full understanding that I know you need. So please lean in with me on this one. We're going to go through all 3 types of care. They're all 3 awesome, by the way. They all 3 generate results. They all 3 are great in their own space. They just need to be applied specifically to a certain cohort of patients. And you're going to hear this word. This will be the word of the day on this podcast episode. Or if you're listening to it at night, the word of the night. Good evening. It is going to be sequencing. We have to go through these things in the right order. So I'm telling you, some of you have had an experience where standard general chiropractic, spinal focused chiropractic, the first one we're going to break down, has helped you in a great way. And you're wondering, will they help my child? And the coolest thing is, those are some of the best people on earth, standard spinal chiropractors. But there's a difference. There's some advanced training, some advanced clinical protocols that we got to get into. So you're probably thinking, like my wife thinks, every single time I do an introduction to one of the podcast episodes. Actually, I'm kind of like, you don't have to listen to these, babe, if you don't want, because I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, get to the point faster. And so let's go ahead. We're just going to get into it, okay? This is going to make you happy. It's going to make my wife happy. And then that's going to make me happy because that's what I love to do. Serve you all and keep her happy. It's a wonderful life, and it seems to be working out rather well to this point. So let's break them down. The first, by far, most common example of chiropractic that you will see in every community and every country, and unfortunately, you will see all over TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram, is rack'em crack'em, spinal focused back pain, neck pain, musculoskeletal. If you're listening up there in Canada, musculoskeletal. There you go. Now you know what I'm talking about. It's just a bad joke, okay? Love you Canadians so much. The truth is, this is the most common kind of chiropractic because this is what most schools, pretty much all schools, train chiropractors to come out with a focus on the spine in the musculoskeletal system. So that's what I graduated with. That was going to be my specialty. My story is in high school, I was a farm kid, baseball player, and I never stopped doing physical work. I injured my shoulder multiple times, and I had a terrible shoulder and a terrible neck. I had constant pain as just 16, 17, 18 and going into college. And I did PT, I did everything else, I did the standard approach, right? Ended up in an orthopedic office. They couldn't do anything for me. They just said, well, if two Aleve after the game aren't helping, take two before the game. And I did that for a season, and then it got worse. So I went back to the same doctor. Hang on, lean in. This is some riveting medical advice. They gave this 17-year-old kid named Tony back in the day, who had some sweet curly hair, by the way. But so there's your image for a podcast. So they were like, oh, well, if two after the game isn't working and two before practice of the game isn't working, what we want you to do is take two more Aleve, the pain relievers that destroy your immune system and your digestive system and eat a hole in your stomach. Why don't you take two of those at lunch? And then I got into my senior season, and that wasn't doing the trick. I was in pain all the time, shoulder splints, shin splints, all the things. They said, well, take two in the morning. So if you're listening and you're appalled, because you should be, because this is our medical system that still exists today, I was taking 8 Aleve every single day. So I was a musculoskeletal patient. I presented once I didn't do this in high school. I wish I had. I finally went in and got chiropractic care as a junior in college after struggling with all this pain. And now you'll find out here when we make this difference, I actually really struggled with sleep, sensory, ADHD, so neurological challenges that you're probably tuned into. And that's also why so many kids with anxiety, ADHD, epilepsy, already at 14, 17, 18, guess what? Their neck kills them. They have constant pain in their traps and their shoulders. The middle between their shoulder blades kills them. Their back hurts. There is no kid, really nobody should deal with back pain in that way. It's actually a neurological issue, but most people end up with something like that. So that was my start. I needed help with that. So I thought chiropractic did that and that alone. And I found an incredible chiropractor who took x-rays, made adjustments, and it was life-changing. My shoulder pain, my neck pain, all of my pain went away in like 8 to 12 visits. I actually loved it so much, y'all, I decided to make a career of it. I had already fallen in love with kind of the idea of chiropractic, just researching it. Actually, even before I became a chiropractor, I've got kind of a crazy story how it all came together, and God just continues to make my story quite crazy. And by the way, big man, I love it. I'm having fun down here, so keep it up. Keep throwing them. I love baseball. Keep throwing the curveballs, and I'll keep swinging at them, all right? So the truth is, come out into chiropractic care, and it works. The standard spinal shoulder pain. I looked at my x-rays and it looked like a bomb went off in there. I was like, I don't think that's supposed to be all crooked, is it? And he was a man of few words. Dr. Rick Elbert, you're a genius. You're incredible. You changed my life. I love that man so much. And he's a man of few words. I don't think Dr. Rick would ever quite rock a podcast like me. So that's why we got along so well. Like my dad, he was silent and stoic. And he just looked at me and he said, no. So my x-rays were a mess. My spine was a mess, and it turns out my nervous system was a mess. And I wanted to sneak my story in here to explain standard spinal chiropractic care for 2 reasons. Number 1, it's awesome. It helps so much. If my story stopped there and I just no longer had shoulder pain and neck pain for the rest of my life, and therefore, if you caught it, didn't need to take 6 to 8 Aleve and destroy, you know how many chronic illnesses I would have had if I continued to listen to the best medical advice that they had? I would have had a destroyed immune system, a destroyed digestive system. I absolutely would have been down the inflammatory condition, the Crohn's and cancer path, had I stayed on the medical merry-go-round that so many kids, even sports injuries, are put on. But the second reason I want to bring it up is now when I look back, I think this, What if they'd have told me sooner? What if they'd have told me sooner that those adjustments were also massively, incredibly, awesomely improving the function of my brain and nervous system? See, I was a kid whose brain and nervous system, right when I started chiropractic care and my shoulder pain had just become enough, I was also flunking out of school. I've got a raging bull brain. God made my brain like probably many of your kiddos. I can see 17 paces ahead, but I really struggled to sit down and pay attention to what was on the board, on the test, or the assignment due that day. So when school was getting harder as a junior and senior in college, and my nervous system was getting more stressed, more subluxated, more what's called sympathetic dominant that we teach on this podcast like nowhere else, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't focus, I couldn't concentrate. So my life was starting to fall apart. And my nervous system was the culprit of those challenges. And my first chiropractor talked a little bit about the nervous system and a whole lot about the spine. And that was enough to get me to fall in love with it. And so for the next 4 years, all the way up until I about graduated, I put all of my training, all of my seminars, all of my focus on helping people like me. I wanted to be the Minnesota Twins and the Minnesota Vikings team chiropractor. And Lord Almighty, if you follow Minnesota sports at all, and if I caught one of you who are one of us Vikings fans, there is no amount of adjusting that can serve our emotional distress and help us through that life. So I kind of lucked out not getting that job, right? So what happened was right towards the end of school, end of chiropractic school, I was going to graduate. And in fact, because the plan was already put in place, my practice started standard. So I'll put a bow on category 1 or option number 1 of chiropractic for you that way. I started Premier Wellness Chiropractic. That's what PWC stands for. And I was going to serve everybody. I was totally open to serving kids, but pretty much sports injuries, not autism, epilepsy, cerebral palsy, special needs, ADHD, chronic illness. There was no plan for that on the whole friggin' time I was going through school. I started my practice with a full rehab, basically like a mini CrossFit gym in there. And right now you're thinking, really? That's crazy. That's true. It's exactly what happened. And I was dead set on helping people who had struggled with the same thing I had. Chronic pain, weren't in shape, were struggling, and there was no focus of any of this neurological stuff. And then our oldest baby girl, Addison, was born, and I decided to go get additional training in prenatal and pediatric care, because for many families out there listening, I'm sure this happened to you, the moment your kids are born, everything you cared about before, and it could have been the most important thing, all of a sudden isn't, right? So these baseball players and sports injuries, they went way down the ranking list of what my heart, who I wanted to serve. And pregnant moms and families and kids moved firmly to first place, and they haven't stopped yet. So I went out and I got some advanced certifications and diplomate training in pediatrics. And this is where I was first exposed to option 2 that you have for chiropractic care for your family. It's called today functional neurology, or as an individual, they would be referred to as a functional neurologist. Now, I thought I was getting an advanced certification in pediatric chiropractic alone. I thought I was just going to get better at adjusting kids and learn more techniques to adjust kids and more clinical protocols to adjust kids. But that was, and it's going to sound nuts today because it's so common, right? Living healthy, infrared saunas, cold plunges, gluten-free, casein-free, the microbiome, like especially for you, a listener, a rock star mom and dad who finds a podcast like this stuff's your jam. If you want to know what functional neurology is, go to your Instagram page, moms. All those holistic hippie healers out in the middle of the forest with their shoes off, going through a gong bath, snorting lavender, just humming and chanting to stimulate their vagus nerve. I could have a lot of fun with this one. And it's funny for me. And it's also one of those memories where it's like, good Lord, I had no idea how sideways these 3 years were going to send me. And I actually loved it. I loved learning about it. I loved those classes. I'm a nerd. I mentioned earlier, I could sit through a microbiome class, a primitive reflex class, a prefrontal cortex class, neurofeedback, biofeedback, neurointegrative exercises, vestibular therapy, you name it, I learned it and I did it. So here outside of Chicago, where our practice is, Crystal Lake, Illinois, we had a functional neurology center long before it was cool. I do not at all consider myself to be one of the pioneers of it. Those would be people, brilliant, amazing people like Dr. Carrick, but I especially read and studied Dr. Melillo's textbook and books. While Oliver was in the hospital, I read Dr. Melillo's textbook 5 times over, cover to cover. And so I was immersed in this work and I did it in our practice. And I wanted to be real clear with this because I know other practitioners are going to listen to this as well. And I know many of you are seeing functional neurologists with your kids right now or have in the past. So I'm going to really, really spend some time in this one. And especially when we get to 3, then we come back and we really get into the differences. I'm really going to take my time here because it's important. I'm not a pioneer of it because as soon as I went whole donkey into it, remember, I'm a farmer. Donkey is, another word for ASS. So I went whole hog. How many farm analogies can I put in this? I went all in. Full send. That's what your teenager would call it, okay? I went full send into this work and built one of the first clinics before anybody knew what the heck it was. And my first 3 years, I had already started to take some of the musculoskeletal spinal, but I already had the inside scans. I had started to be exposed to some mentors like Dr. Mike Cody and Dr. Fletcher, who talked a lot more about the nervous system part of chiropractic. And so while I'm talking about, I'm going to try and keep the 3 differences clean, in my experience, they weren't. I basically merged from number 1 right into number 2, almost not even knowing I was doing it, and then came right back to number 3. Because my first, I call it V1 of our practice, standard chiropractic, doing that and that alone, even though I knew we were influencing the nervous system, I didn't know near as much as I know now. Guess what worked for kids with ADHD, sensory processing disorder, seizures, and epilepsy? They helped them. It helped them. Now, remember, what we do is not a treatment. It's not a cure. So that's the last thing I'm saying. I'm not saying it treated their autism. It cured their ADHD. I'm saying those things are rooted in an imbalanced, overstressed, dysregulated nervous system. And chiropractic, even those, by the way, that only talk about the spine and musculoskeletal care, they just don't know, even themselves as a chiropractor, because they barely teach it to us in school, how much they're influencing the nervous system. And I know that to be true because I was one of them in V1 of the practice. And all of a sudden, right before my very eyes and through my hands, I had this incredible blessing of these really tough neurological cases getting better after a few weeks and a few months of chiropractic care. And then I overcooked it. And then all in the nature of good, all in the, what's the word I'm looking for here? All with the idea of doing more good, getting more results, getting better results and bigger results for tougher cases. I went and I did all the bells and whistles that functional neurology, biomedical, today it would be called functional medicine, integrated medicine. I did it all. Had one of the very first clinics. Now, parents, I'm going to triple tap and double click right in here because that's your journey. I get to meet so many of you in person in my clinic here today and on Instagram, on DMs, on our website. And I know that so many of you have probably skipped step 1. You maybe did not go to a standard spinal chiropractor. And if you did, I'm going to cover that at the end of the episode, how to know, the differences and how to get to a neurologically focused chiropractor or how to get your regular chiropractor into our training network so they can get the results you're looking for your kiddo. I'm going to cover that in this episode. But I'll tell you this, the more I did, the less our results became what we were looking for. The more we did, which sounded and felt like the right answer to help more kids more better, even though that's not great English, it had the opposite effect. And so I know right now in the thick of this episode, I'm reaching so many parents, and you probably already knew that. You probably already deep down somewhere had that interpretation and that analysis happening inside your own brain and your own heart and your own mom and dad gut where you went, man, does it seem like the more we do, the more things jam up? The more our child becomes dysregulated, the more our child becomes overwhelmed. And even some of the results that we were maybe getting before, actually, there's almost like this tipping point. And the more that we worry about these primitive reflexes and these detoxes and all of this stuff, I'll just leave it at that. The more we worry about all this stuff, the less results we start to see. And here, sometimes, because this is what I saw in my clinic, this is why I'm extra passionate about it and so stoked for this episode, I didn't just see less good results. I actually saw kids get worse. A lot of times when we would, most of the time, to be clear, I just got to tell you the truth because I lived it. I have this clinical experience. This isn't me teaching a seminar and selling a product and telling you this is what it is. This is me through God's journey for me, actually applying this work, paying attention to the only thing I've ever given a absolute anything about, which is results for your child. And we actually got worse results, and often kids regressed. Often kids would have a detox. They would get worse if we worked on primitive reflexes and this functional neurology integrative stuff first. Now, I need to really slow down and be extra clear with my explanations here. It doesn't mean those things are bad. It doesn't mean that for some kids and some cases in a specific sequence or batting order, they don't actually get great results. What you're going to see when we get to the back end of this episode and we put it all together, and I need you to listen, if there's ever one to listen all the way through, it's this one, and maybe twice and maybe thrice, because these differences are really important. And nobody else is talking about them because I don't know. I've not yet met a practitioner, except for a few in our network who now have the same findings, who have had this experience of applying standard chiropractic care, applying functional neurology chiropractic care, and being all obsessed with primitive reflexes and microbiome and detoxes and all these things, and vestibular neurointegrative exercises and biofeedback, all the things. And then cleaned it up and gone to where we're going next, which is teaching you exactly what neurologically focused chiropractic care is, how to find one for your family, or how to take your local chiropractor who maybe doesn't know these differences yet either and hasn't been exposed to the training that we have yet either, and get them there so your kiddo can get results. But here's why that happened, where the more good things we would do, but when we did them in the wrong order and we worried about primitive reflexes and tongue ties and detoxes too soon, we would actually destabilize a child's nervous system because it's already destabilized. If you're a child struggling with autism, ADHD, epilepsy, their nervous system is already overwhelmed. Their sympathetic nervous system is already overloaded. Their vagus nerve, their ability to integrate and coordinate even good things is very limited. And so healing has to be a sequential process for maximum results, and it actually needs to be a slower process with less things happening in the beginning instead of more. I don't know of anything else I could say more important, and I know no one else is talking about it, so I'm going to run back through that one more time. Neurological healing for neurological cases and chronic illness in kids, especially autism, epilepsy, you name it. It requires a very specific sequence of healing endeavors applied in the right order for maximum results. And when you really learn what that is, you find out that in the beginning stages, the early initial foundational stages of healing, which are essential. It's like building a house. You cannot skip over the foundation. It's like restoring a house. You can't just cover it up. You got to go in and you got to fix the leaks. You got to fix the damage in the foundation if you ever want it good for good. So it's got to go in a specific order, and it needs to be less things being applied in the early initial stages, not more. And I don't know of any harder or more important lesson to teach to parents or providers, because our hearts get in the way of our heads. Y'all, I'm on a podcast, so I can't quite draw this one out right now, what I want to do. And if you're on YouTube, we'll actually tag this video so you can go through it. Or if you find this on social, just go to YouTube, go to the show notes, and we'll take you to it. I really want to show you a graphic right now, which shows what's called the neurological developmental hierarchy sequence. It's also, therefore, the neurological healing and reorganizational sequence. And it starts with the central and autonomic nervous system first. It doesn't start with the gut. It doesn't start with primitive reflexes. It doesn't start with brain-based therapy like neurofeedback or lasers shined into the brain and onto the head. And it doesn't start with a lot of machines that work with your child's vestibular system. The way God designed the development of the nervous system to go in a very specific sequence is exactly how healing needs to happen, even if your child is 27, 23, 17. Our intensive cases, which we have tons of teenagers and young adults come from all over the world, and they have deep-seated epilepsy and anxiety and depression. The things we work on first are their central nervous system and its basic functions like sleeping, digestion, but not digestion from a probiotic and a microbiome conversation, digestion from a neurogenic conversation. So I could go and have gone and will on another podcast episode. So this one right here, we're going to release it in a bit of a series where we're really having a similar conversation. I'm going to do another podcast episode. I'm a little worried about this one because it's such a visual lesson, and obviously it's a podcast. So you'll have to just imagine me doing my hand charades here when you listen to this podcast and the next one about the neurological sequence, the neurological hierarchy, and the healing with which it matters. But I need you to know this. There's a third option for chiropractic care. And that third option is what we now refer to as neurologically focused chiropractic care, and specifically for for your family, for your kiddos, you want someone who has a pediatric specialty and advanced pediatric training. Now, I'm going to come right out and say this, then I'll explain what this word means in vivid detail here before we're done. Neurologically focused chiropractic care puts its emphasis on achieving neurological, so central and autonomic nervous system stability, resiliency, and adaptability before introducing other therapies and interventions. We are obsessed with this sequential approach and understanding that the health and the function and the regulation and the balance of the nervous system is in its own thing. And if we don't start there and stay there until the nervous system is functioning in a much more improved, balanced, regulated, coordinated way, well, then we can't expect any good results from other therapies and other interventions. And often we could expect some funky results from them as well. So what I want to do with the rest of our time on this podcast episode, we've already gone into the 3 different types. So I've already introduced some of the things. I'm really going to dive deeper into this. But the truth is, it's a word that maybe, is too much for some people, but when you're seeing a neurologically focused chiropractor, you know that they are entirely obsessed with one thing instead of partly trained and partly focused on a bunch of things. I have talked to parents about this thousands of times over the last couple of years, and it so rings home when they realize, you know what? What really stinks about the pediatrician and the conventional neurologist on the medical side is they don't really dive deep. They can't really answer any questions. They just kind of keep dismissing me or saying we don't know and blaming it on genetics and chemical imbalance. And so parents leave there just feeling honestly like they didn't get any of their questions answered and they don't really have any understanding of what's causing their kiddos' neurological challenges. But then when you go in and see other specialists, you often come up empty there as well because they're only looking in one window in one place. And so the differences really matter because it's kind of 2 things at once. When you're seeing a neurologically focused chiropractor for your family, by the very nature of them taking care of the central and autonomic nervous system, and again, I know I can just shorten it and say nervous system from here forward, by them so fully and completely taking care of the function of the nervous system, they're taking care of everything else as well. So one of my favorite questions and conversations to get into is the reality. And this is kind of a dad thing. I think a lot of times I've noticed in practice, a lot of times dads won't say it to me, but I am a dad and I am a dude. So I can kind of pick up what they're putting down without them even saying it verbally. And I know what they're thinking. They're thinking, you know what, bro? This sounds too good to be true. How can one thing, chiropractic, working on the spine, how can they don't say it in that voice, but like, how can one thing change all these other things? How could one thing help my child with autism who has a multitude of things? How could this one thing change sleep and gut function and brain function and everything in between? Because that one thing, the nervous system, controls everything else in the body. So we've gone into it. We've talked about the first thing that a stressed nervous system will end up doing is struggling with sleep. The second thing a stressed out, subluxated, sympathetic dominant nervous system will struggle with is digestive function because the gut takes a lot of energy and a lot of focus from the nervous system, not woo-woo, weirdo, hippie energy, like actual neurophysiological ATP, mitochondrial energy. And so when the nervous system is stressed, the gut gets the short end of the stick real early in that process. And third, the immune system. Fighting off a cold, dealing with immune challenges, that takes a lot of focus and energy. Again, real energy from the nervous system to deal with inflammation, to deal with toxins, to do that. The endocrine system. So what happens when the central nervous system is subluxated, sympathetic dominant, dysregulated, the one thing that neurologically focused chiropractors work on more obsessively and focused on than anything else out there, all the other systems downstream get the short end of the stick. Primitive reflexes, tongue ties, restricted airways, they come from subluxation and sympathetic dominance, dysautonomia, dysregulation as well. So when you're working on the nervous system with adjustments done the way these kind of chiropractors do, our kind, if you will, you work on those things by actually adjusting their root cause. Primitive reflexes are only retained when sympathetic dominance and nervous system imbalance or subluxation is retained first. So when you work on A, you don't have to worry about B. And a lot of practitioners out there in today's world, they will say on their websites and on their Instagram and on their socials, hey, we're working on the root cause. But if you're not working on the central an autonomic nervous system, dysautonomia, sympathetic dominance, vagus nerve dysfunction, if you're not working at the core of the brainstem and the nervous system, you're not actually really working on the root cause. That right there is what separates neurologically focused chiropractic than anything else. Now, this thing I want to cover just for another minute or two is the hierarchy. Again, whole episode coming out about this right after this one. In fact, it's the next episode I'm going to record and put into this kind of batch or series, which we're trying to do that with the podcast, is kind of link up a couple of things together for you in these little mini series, not Law and Order sort of mini series, but, serve your family sort of mini series. And so doing things in the right order and doing things understanding the developmental hierarchy is the healing hierarchy. And honestly, this is the toughest thing. That's why I'm going to do a whole nother episode. I'm touching on it multiple times on this one, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to serve your families with a whole episode on it, because it's really, you got to think through it 11 times over to really make sense of it. Because on paper, it seems like my child with autism, their gut's a mess, their immune system's a mess, their microbiome's a mess, their primitive reflexes are a mess, they're gross, they have a low tone, they have spasticity, they have fine motor issues, they got sensory issues, they have emotional dysregulation issues. They've got speech and communication issues. We know they have heavy metals and toxins stuck in their body. So you go down this list of multifactorial things, neurophysiological dysfunctions that we know make up chronic illness in kids. It's never one thing. So it makes sense to go, well, we can't just do one thing and expect results. And I agree, but now the word but, if you've listened to a couple of podcast episodes, I think I brought this joke up. My kids are not allowed. This is an Ebel rule right here. They are not allowed to start a sentence with the words well or but. If they put them together, well, but, well, then they're making an excuse, right? They're about to, now that you hear this, you're like, oh my goodness, that's what every kid and every person does. You make an excuse. If you're about to make an excuse, you start your sentence off with but, well, or well, but, if you really want to double down on the excuse. And I'm about to make one. But it is important to put things in the right order. So the truth is, all of these other interventions, or I went one step ahead. All of these other different components of dysfunction that make up chronic illness, the gut and the microbiome, the toxins, the endocrine disruption, these are real issues that really must be addressed, but they should not be addressed first if the nervous system is dysregulated, subluxated, and out of balance first. And I know this from studying not just the science and the neurophysiological from a textbook standpoint. Again, I just got to share it with you. I know this from seeing it firsthand in practice. The more we did all at once, we were doing too much and we got less results. So this is all about the sequence. And nobody out there in healthcare understands it as much as we do as neurologically focused chiropractors. Now, before we end this one, I want to answer some questions that have been coming in, and they fit right in this frame of this conversation with the different types of chiropractic care. What if you've already tried that? Chiropractic care. What if you've already gone to a chiropractor? What if they were even a chiropractor that specialized in pediatrics and specialized in the nervous system? Now, I want to take you through a list. First question to ask yourself, were they really neurologically focused entirely in their clinical protocols, or just kind of by name alone and website? Was it someone that really went this deep? And I don't like to use myself ever in conversations, but let's just go for it because it'll help your family here. Are they explaining things in this granular, vivid detail like I am on this podcast and we do on our website and our socials? If they're not going into the nervous system at this level, then they don't have the understanding at this level, because you have to understand it at the level that we do to communicate it and explain it and articulate it. So I want you to really look at it from a communication standpoint. Does it seem like when they're talking about the nervous system, it's surface level, or do they have the ability to go deep into it? Number 2 question to ask, is their exam and assessment completely rooted in the nervous system? Now, if someone is just measuring primitive reflexes and say what's called vestibular testing, like balance and other sort of things, those are actually not direct neurological assessments. I've been to seminars and I'm that person who sits in that class and goes, I don't think you're calling a spade, but that's not a spade. So primitive reflexes and other neurointegrative incoordination, visual accommodation tests, vestibular tests, and other sort of neurological tests, those are secondary findings of primary neurological issues. Now, this conversation is probably for the podcast I'm about to launch for the chiropractors and the training. But if a chiropractor is not actually, truly, fully measuring the function of the nervous system with what's called the insight scans, if you're not getting neurothermal, EMG, and heart rate variability testing at your chiropractor, if they are not scanning the function of the nervous system, because those scans tell us, is this happening? Is your child subluxated? And is their nervous system out of balance? And if so, to what degree and where? The scan, they tell us more than that, but those are the three main things that the scans do. So you cannot be a nervous system focused chiropractor by name alone. You actually have to put your clinical protocols and especially your exam and assessment. Number two, actually that's number two. Number three thing I want you to ask yourself is, okay, maybe we've got our nervous system focused chiropractor. We're seeing a PX doctor, but are we doing too much? And moms and dads, you can tell I'm kind of slowing my roll down here a little bit as we get towards, the end of this episode here. Only you can answer that. Now, I highly encourage you to sit down knee to knee with your PX doctor, next appointment, pull them aside after the adjustment, or if you've already started care or in the process of starting care, and go, hey, will you look at this list with me? Will you tell me what matters most? Now, that's a tough conversation. It's one of the toughest things I do with my job is enter that conversation with your family and say, hey, each of these things in a vacuum are fan-freaking-tastic, but what's the sequence? What's the batting order? And I know how redundant I sound right now in this podcast episode. I planned to be a broken record all the way through this. Because when you look at that, when you hear this episode, and I just want to triple tap on this, if your mom and dad gut goes, I know we're doing too much. Awesome. Now you know. Now you can do something about it. Now you can take action going forward, and the action can slow down to speed up. The action can apply what are real true neuroplasticity, neurological reorganizational healing properties is really summarized in this phrase: less is more, especially early. Like if I were to get an arm tattoo, instead, if I ever got tired or I lost my voice at the seminar that I teach other chiropractors, I would just tattoo that on one arm. It would be like less is more. And then the other arm would be especially early, initially in the first phases of care. Now that'd be a really nerdy tattoo. It'd be a really functional tattoo for me to teach this to other chiropractors. And now that I said it in my own weird, unique way, now maybe you won't forget it here as we go towards the end of this podcast. So if you know you're doing too much, awesome. Don't get dismayed. Don't get frustrated. I know that's easy for me to say here as the podcast voice, but get excited, moms and dads. Get stoked. Get fired up. You finally found it. You finally found the reason why you're probably spinning your wheels and stuck in the mud and not seeing results with your kiddo. You got to slow down. You get to slow down to speed up and focus on the nervous system first. And so those three things kind of lead to this fourth thing. Is it time for a reset? Is it time for a fresh look? What if you had the ability to do this? Now, by the way, I am not one of those doctors who says, don't go to Instagram, don't go to Google. Do go to Instagram, do go to Google. But remember what you need help with most, putting it all in order, okay? That should not and does not belong on your plate, moms and dads. The real doctor of getting your kiddo better, they not only should provide the care that addresses the root cause directly, but they should help put things together. So when you see a PX doctor, when you have a true neurologically focused chiropractor, they will go beyond just the spine and the structure. So a level 1 standard chiropractor, spinal focused chiropractor, fan-freaking-tastic. Maybe not enough for your child with chronic illness, and especially if they have neurological challenges. And maybe just not enough for your family who's looking for the most out of your chiropractic care. And if the nervous system is the boss. So if you want to optimize the function of the nervous system, even from a wellness prevention standpoint, you want to take your family to a nervous system focused PX doctor. And maybe you went or are in number 2, and you know that you got to go backwards to go forwards from this one. Take the opportunity that this episode provides to start fresh, start new, hit reset, and go, okay, now that I know what we know here, where would we start first, and then what's next? And the final just action step, I can tell you, rockstar moms and dads, do not take that path alone. I think, and one of the greatest chiropractors, perhaps, and yes, when you're in a certain profession and it's changed your child's life, your family's life, and millions of families' lives that you get connected to in this way, you end up with favorite chiropractors, okay? So I know it's like, is this guy's hero other chiropractors? Yeah, yep, just admitted it here on the podcast. So Dr. BJ Palmer, he is the developer of chiropractic. His dad, Dr. D.D. Palmer, invented it and created it. And he was called the builder and the developer of chiropractor. And he said this, he said, honestly, it's not the adjustment that changes people's lives. And it's funny because he was intentionally putting that down to put the next thing up. He wasn't really putting it down. He was just putting the next thing up. It's the education. It's the empowerment. It's the philosophy. In chiropractic, we actually call it philosophy. I like to think of it as perspective. It's the lens through with which we understand things and look at things. And the lens that conventional medicine uses, man, they don't see nothing, right? But the lens is that functional neurology and biomedical use, it's often too many, too much, too overwhelming. And so what I love about nervous system focused, neurologically focused chiropractic care and PX doctors, I love that through our simplicity and our straightforward obsession with getting the nervous system better, we can help with everything. And not only can we make those adjustments that will transform your child's nervous system, get them out of sympathetic dominance, activate the vagus nerve, get their nervous system balanced, regulated, functioning again, but now we can start to line the ducks up. Now we can start to help collaborate. Every one of us doctors that is in the PX Docs Network, we are very active and intentional in forming partnerships and care collaborations with other experts and providers in our community. Because we know, putting this all together, we know that once the nervous system is better, and we can measure this, again, with our technology, you're seeing a nervous system focused chiropractor if they're measuring the function of the nervous system as a baseline at the beginning, but then we need to keep measuring it. We do what are called progress scans and comparative scans to make sure that we know the nervous system gets better. And we're going to close this one down with a word that I brought up right when we introduced this third category, neurologically focused chiropractic: stability, resiliency, and adaptability. You could kind of call it functionality. Through our testing, both through the scans, through our case history, so when we do progress checks, we get updates on how life is changing, and then what we call our neurotonal checks that all of PX docs are trained to do on the table, we can actually find this neurological line in the sand when the nervous system has reached stability and resiliency and adaptability, pliability. I like to think of it as slack in the rope. And that in and of itself will have already created all sorts of life improvements, quality of life transformation for your family. In fact, a lot of kiddos, they've gone through all the goals that the family had for care and then some when they reach this neurological stability point. But you know what also happens at that point? Now your child is ready to respond to diet changes, to detoxes, to PT, to OT, to speech therapy, to cognitive behavioral therapy. Now they work better in ABA and get way more out of it. And I could go on down the list of other things that are wildly helpful that are so much more exponentially helpful and beneficial once the nervous system reaches this place called neurological stability, resiliency, and adaptability. The first and by far and away most helpful thing, and perhaps for a lot of kiddos out there, the only thing that is actually potent and influential enough to the function of the nervous system to get it to that crucial, critical point is neurologically focused chiropractic adjustments. And so I will forever continue to ring this bell and tell this story through this podcast, our YouTube, our Facebook, our Instagram, our webinars, our articles on the website. And it's essential to know the differences between the three different types of chiropractic care and the three different types of chiropractors out there, not because one is better than the other, but for your child, one might be the only one that is really dialed in to the right way to get the most effective, optimal, incredible results for your kiddo. So even if you've seen a chiropractor before and the job didn't get done, take this conversation and all the explanations and different elements we went through in here, take them to your chiropractor. Ask these questions. Have we handled this? Are we at neurological stability? Go into that conversation, and I empower you and I encourage you, and I really want you to do it. Our docs in our network, they're really trained to take on even the toughest cases. And you know what? Tough cases take a long time to see results. Often the only, and I'm going to minimize this for kind of like earlier when I minimized the adjustment to maximize the education and the empowerment. A lot of times in the first 90 days, I know I'm on a podcast, but I'm finger quoting that, the only changes we see are on the scans. But the scans look so deep and under the hood of the nervous system. And a lot of kiddos with epilepsy and autism and chronic neurological challenges for years on end, the symptoms aren't going to change first. The symptoms aren't going to change first. They're going to change last. And the bigger kind of brain-based symptoms like behavior, like seizures, like communication, verbalization, and speech, they're going to be the last ones to come online when we're actually addressing the root cause and getting healing to happen in the right order. Because that stuff was last to develop, would have been last to develop, even when things went optimally, if there was no perfect storm and no stress on their nervous system. So symptoms can take a long time to change, which is why our docs are trained to look at the scans and the tableside assessments and be able to measure real, actual neurological progress and improved function. And those scans mean everything for your child and your family, because when they are moving in the right direction, and often there's a messy middle, and I'm going to make some videos for our website about reading scans. So even from me and Dr. Matt and our team, you'll be able to see that, but your doc will walk you through them. So when the scans are improving, we know we're on the way. And the second cohort or category, we call it, that we can track change for big stuff like autism and epilepsy, is we can track what are called neurological soft signs. Now, these probably deserve their own episode as well. But when your child starts to sleep better, when they start to try new foods and eat better, when they have less sensory issues, less sensitivity to haircuts and certain clothes and making transitions, when their digestion is better and they're going to the bathroom easier, when their immune system and their sinuses clear out faster and they get over and through colds easier, there is a whole list of about 5 to 7. Actually, we can often stretch it out to about 10 to 15 inside the office of list of neurological soft signs that honestly are hard to pay attention to as a parent because you're so understandably worried about the big stuff, the ADHD, the seizures, the nonverbal, right? But we know what order and what pace healing happens in, and we have multiple different ways to track progress. Medicine only tracks symptoms. We track function. So these scans, I'm going to put one more just nail in that conversation to say that's what makes all the difference in the world. So if you're already under care with a PX and nervous system focused chiropractor, and you're a couple adjustments, couple of weeks, some of the tougher cases, even a couple of months under care, and you haven't seen big changes yet, look more closely. Sit down knee to knee with your doctor, look at those scans, and you'll see improvements and restoration and reorganization happening there. And then look at these different quality of life or neurological soft signs and look for changes and improvements there, because they're not little things, they're huge things. Because we actually need to get the basics, the core foundational parts of the nervous system and that sequence to heal first to get to the big stuff inside the brain. This is how neurologically focused chiropractic works. And this is how we work, because that's how it works. I'll close you with this. One of my best friends and one of the best doctors we have in this network, Dr. Jason Day, has been doing this perfect storm work and an absolute brother and best friend of mine for a long time out in Holly Springs, North Carolina. Hey, shout out, kid, North Carolina. Did I do that right? If you grew up in the 90s and 2000s, I think I either got that right or I didn't get it right. But the truth is, he said this, we were teaching this stuff to a bunch of chiropractors the other day about how we need to focus, or actually years ago, about how we need to focus on what matters most first. And he said, it works this way, so we work this way. So why did I take an hour in an episode titled, hey, the different kinds of chiropractic, to get this neurological, this physiological, and this scientific for you? So you can see that the reason we have such a specialty and such a difference and such an obsession on the function of the nervous system is it works that way, so we work that way. God designed us this way. That's how development happens. So that's how healing happens. So we don't make the rules. We don't override the rules like medicine and other things try and do. We work with your child's innate healing capacity by its exact design. And we tap into that in the right place, in the right sequence, and the right order. And I know that this can change your family's life, and it can change a ton of other families' lives as well, because they maybe haven't found chiropractic at all. They're maybe going to a standard chiropractor. They're maybe going to a functional neurologist when they really need to switch up and see a nervous system focused, neurologically focused PX doctor first instead. And so I just have one more request at the end of this deep dive episode. please share the heck out of this. Please send this to your group chats. Please send this to the other moms you know that are in your community whose children are struggling with these different challenges. It is so the mission God has sent me here to provide, to number one, make sure people know about chiropractic, period. But number 1B, to know that they really know about neurologically focused pediatric chiropractic and the real absolute life transformation that this will make. So please, as always, subscribe to the show wherever you're following it. Hit the little buttons. It actually really helps us reach what we're really, really, really wanting to get into the top 100, because there's so many incredible other podcast hosts in the health and wellness space who they need to know about this conversation. Their audience needs to know about this conversation. And in fact, if you listen to other podcasts and they're any size, anybody, like if you have somebody you know who's got a rockin' podcast and you want me on it having this conversation about the perfect storm and the nervous system and pediatric chiropractic done this way, will you please make that connection for me? I'll put that request at the end of this. Please make sure you subscribe. And if you could even take the time to leave a review, that helps us tremendously. And then most importantly, because every kid counts, every share counts, every Instagram story link counts, every text message counts, please send this episode especially out to any and every family that you know needs it and could benefit from it. God bless. Be well. I love you. I'll see you on the next one.